Well, howdy, traveler. Welcome back. Don't be shy now. You take your place by the fire. Say hello to your neighbors. It's good to see you all. You don't need me to tell you this, but this world is difficult to get along with. What with its many nasty critters and spirits that play tricks in the shadows. But you and I both know that not every haunting is born of ghosts, don't we? No. Some places carry a heavier curse. A curse hammered into their bones by the wants of men. And the wants of men, friends, well, they can be darker than anything crawling in the pattern. So tonight, let me tell you a tale. A tale of a man named Tusk, and the fine hotel he raised like a jewel in the wasteland. Chandeliers high as the heavens, carpets thick as church silence. A place meant to stand proud against the dust and ruin. But pride's a hungry thing, and when a man feeds it long enough, it learns to bite. Lean in close now, and listen careful. This here's the story of the Violet Vale Hotel, and the horrors that walked its halls. Tusk paced the lobby of the hotel as he wrung his handkerchief between his sweaty hands. He glanced at a mirror in the foyer and stopped. At the top of his head, there was a rebellion foreman. Among the neat and oiled-down hairs of his thinning pate, there stood a lock of willful strands. He licked his already damp palm, and his fingers squeaked as he smoothed it down. For a moment, they appeared to submit to Tusk's iron will, and then they sprang back to their upright position. Defiance in the most cruel of forms, the sort that attacked Tusk's most vulnerable sensibility, his appearance. Now, Tusk had always been sensitive about his looks. He could even pinpoint the moment this insecurity reared its ugly head. It was the summer of '41, and Solomon Richardson had just spoken the words that would travel with Tusk for the next 50 years.
Is your last name actually Tusk, or is it a nickname? You look like a walrus.
Since then, Tusk had found that he had a knack for finding reflective surfaces wherever he went. Some would call him vain, but Tusk would rather use the word conscious. He was of the opinion that one's outward appearance should match that of the inward. A metaphor, of course. If that were true, then everyone would be walking arrangements of glossy red organs, sticky wet muscle, and stringy sinew, though he supposed his hotel was a bit different in that regard. The Violet Vale stood tall and proud in the thick forests of Sheerlight, to the southeast of the civil lands. The one speck of civility in 1,000 miles of dust and ruin. Or so the ad had said. But in reality, this hotel was as much a part of the Badlands as Ponderosa was a part of Cherry Hill. That is to say, not at all. It would never have survived its infancy in those dusty plains anyway. What with the bandits that loot and kill, and tribes that eat the hearts of men and steal women and children. Not to mention the nasty buggers in the land itself, hardly a land hospitable to those born to it, let alone a hotel as grand as the Vale. The workers would have been picked off one by either the Alkena or the Thorn tribes, unless the investors had added a small army to the payroll. But they would never have gone for such a thing, and that would have been a death sentence to Tusk's dream.
I want every window to be a painting, a portal you want to walk through,
he had said as the designer took notes.
Why not the door?
What? You said you want to walk through the window. Why not the door? The worst part wasn't the labor or the cost. It was trying to explain beauty to men who'd never laid eyes on it. There had been some talk among the investors about what the point was of building such a luxurious hotel in such a backwoods location as Sheerlight. They were quick to point out that Grinlock Gate alone had more than enough hotels. Why wouldn't they just go to any number of those?
Grinlock Gate is over 200 miles away. Should the good traveling folk of this land not have access to a clean bed at night? Fresh cooked food? I suppose hot water should be kept from them too? Are comfort and safety commodities reserved only for the rich and powerful? Is this why our forefathers crossed the Silver Sea? I thought they'd left Red March for freedom, to escape this sort of cruelty for the masses. I don't want to cater to only the wealthy, gentlemen. I want to extend my reach far further than that."
It was a riveting speech that Tusk had adapted from a book he'd read, The Storied Histories of New Providence by J.C. Weishaupt. Good reading, as far as Tusk was concerned. It gave him an edge when negotiating for the hotel to be built, and to his mind, it was the speech that won him the day. Again, Tusk gazed at himself in the mirror and tried desperately to get the rebel hairs atop his head to lie flat. He held his breath, waiting to see if they'd submit, and this time they stayed down, and he felt he could breathe again. His eyes moved around the lobby of the hotel. He was so proud of his accomplishment here. It truly was a marvel, this place. He had commissioned an array of carpenters to carve the elegant banisters just to his liking, each spindle shaped to match an old sketch he'd found in a forgotten archive, replicated with painstaking precision. He'd spent weeks choosing the right type of wood, rejecting shipment after shipment, until the grain caught the light just so. He called on the foremost minds of industry to line the hotel with gas technology, ensuring that every room could be lit and heated with ease. No more freezing mornings or dim hallways, not under his roof. The pipes had to be hidden, of course, routed through the walls so that not even the most critical guest could spot a valve or seam out of place. Some said it was excessive, miles of copper veins winding through the walls into rooms that didn't even need the extra warmth. But Tusk knew the value of preparation. The gas could be fed anywhere in the building if he so chose, silent and invisible. The servant passages were much the same, narrow, slanted corridors that spidered behind the guest rooms. He'd claimed they were historical features preserved for charm, but really, they were his favorite thing about the place. You could stand behind a wall and hear guests breathe in their sleep. You could watch without ever being seen. He had found a talented chef in Galloway Bay to head the kitchen, a man who could make broth taste like poetry and biscuits crumble like memories. But even that hadn't been left to chance. He had personally tasted dozens of meals, rewritten the menu alongside the chef, and redesigned the kitchen layout twice to improve flow and efficiency. He chose the wallpaper himself, the curtains, the ironwork around the chandeliers. He stood over painters, breathing down their necks, sending entire teams home if the color wasn't true to the tone in his head. Even the scent of the place, the faint trace of lilac and oak, had been calculated, tested, and finally approved after weeks of perfumers adjusting the blend. This was not just a hotel. This was Tusk's hotel. Every inch of it was his will, his obsession made manifest. Why, send inspectors, send detectives, send the finest criminal experts money can buy, interview every guest, dust every room. Mr. Tusk was supremely confident that they wouldn't find so much as a blemish on the violet veil. The lodge was strong, spacious, resplendent, and above all, luxurious. Not a thread out of place, not a splinter to snag. Perfection from chandelier to cellar. Save one small detail. There hadn't been a single guest in months. Mr. Tusk swallowed hard and smoothed his waistcoat over his modest belly. His indigestion had come on strong this morning. He hadn't been sleeping well of late, probably due to his moving out of the hotel, which was the final straw for him. If he wasn't willing to stay in the perfect hotel for free, how could he expect anyone else to pay for the privilege? The first 5 years, everything had run smoothly, and the Vale had become one of the most sought-after hotels this side of the Gravetooth Mountains. Until that damned woman had lost her mind and slaughtered her husband and children with a pair of scissors in the night. Tusk shuddered at the memory of that room after the massacre. He had found the mother hanging by her neck from the chandelier in the lobby, the same chandelier Tusk stood under now. He had wanted to replace it entirely, but the investors wouldn't hear of it.
"It's fully functional as it is. Why replace it?" they said.
Tusk didn't see the point in that particular fight. A chandelier he could handle. What he couldn't handle was the public finding out that this had happened under his roof. It didn't take long for the news outlets to get wind of the tragedy, and before long, There were stories of voices in the dark, things being moved in the night, and doors locking by themselves. He'd even read one article that claimed a guest could hear the mother calling for her children. Now, Tusk didn't believe in ghosts. To his mind, imagination without will was a domain reserved for small-minded fools. And it was that sort of small-minded thinking that Tusk blamed for landing him in his current situation. And it was his own open mind that led him to take a chance. He had seen an ad in the morning edition of the Civic Standard, the only paper that reached this far out of Cherry Hill. Bellamy and Spindle's Society for the Pursuit of Post-Mortem Phenomena, BSSPPMP. He thought the name was long and every bit as ridiculous as the service it offered. There were no ghosts in this place. These stories had no weight. Tusk had never seen a thing after that night. He'd never heard any strange voices either. No, this beautiful hotel, once vibrant and full of life, had never been so quiet. But the problem remained. Who else was going to stay in his hotel? Certainly not paying customers with these news reports floating around. He thought that maybe getting some professionals to take a look could help. Perhaps, instead of banishing actual ghosts, they could expel the rumors of ghosts that plagued his home. He'd second and third guessed himself before taking the plunge, but he'd sent a wire and expected to hear back in a few days, only to receive a reply minutes later. Mr. Tusk, thank you for your inquiry. Expect arrival in 4 days. BSSPPMP. The 4 days had come and gone, and thus Tusk found himself standing in his beautiful and, according to the news outlets, haunted place yet again. They would be arriving any minute now. Tusk removed his hand from his head. The willful stray hairs seemed to have learned their lesson indeed. It had taken a bit of a beating, but they'd fallen in line. He was just about to inspect his teeth when he heard the sound of something from up the stairs. A racket? He couldn't tell, but it shifted its sound to something akin to the faint ticking of soft footsteps, and they were growing closer. A knot stuck in his throat as he swallowed hard, but then the sound moved from upstairs to the hall in the entryway, and then they moved to another hall right behind him. Tusk felt like backing away, backing right out the double doors and all the way back to the shabby flat he had been forced to call his home. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They multiplied from 1 hall to 2 to 4. Every hall he could see held the same sound in every direction, all growing nearer.
Nonsense. This is all nonsense, all of it,
he thought, and shook his head, but in that moment felt all his nerve fade as if it were never there to begin with. He turned for the doors, only to be taken by complete surprise.
Is everything all right, sir?
Tusk's heart nearly leapt from his chest, and he almost lost his balance. A squeal, ferocious as a cornered mouse, slipped out before he could stop it.
Merciful saints, Nibs! If you insist on skulking around like some sort of churchyard ghoul, at least rattle a teacup, or clear your throat so I don't drop dead at my own front desk. Think of the scandal.
The young bellhop looked more apologetic than anything as he raised his hands, like a grandson ready to catch a fallen elder.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to frighten you.
Tusk drew in a long breath, smoothing his waistcoat and composure in one motion.
How long have you been standing there?
Oh, well, the whole time, I suppose. As Nibs stood before him, eyes wide and long face taut with worry, Tusk wondered if he had always looked so very much like a rat in a uniform. Tusk supposed so. By his memory, the boy looked exactly as he had the last time Tusk was here. Same pressed purple uniform, same tilted cap. Not a crease or scuff in sight. He had chosen those uniforms himself, but he did not recall approving the faint smudge of a mustache.
I thought I told you to shave that peach fuzz.
Nibs brought a finger self-consciously to his lip.
Well, I thought since there are no guests and no staff. And yet you still wear your uniform.
Nibs looked down, bashful. I like fitting the part. Out of everyone in Tusk's employ, Nibs was the closest thing to a favorite. Always early, always proper, and eager to lend a hand when needed, regardless of the task.
"You never left the hotel,"
Tusk pointed out.
"Oh, no, sir. You told me to stay, just in case guests arrive. Tend to them with the utmost haste, you said, and I did just that." "And?"
Nibs blinked at him with a bright, hopeful grin, the sort of vacant joy that begged for a pat on the head.
"And what?" "Guests, Nibs. Were there any guests?" "Oh, well, no. Awful lot of reporters dropped by, though. Said they needed a piece for the paper. I told them to have at it. My Uncle Wax, no relation, always said that all publicity was good publicity."
Tusk had wondered how the press had gotten photographs of the inside of the Vale. He pressed his thumb and forefinger to his eyes. He reminded himself that it wasn't the boy's fault. As owner and proprietor of the establishment, the blame must fall to him. He was nothing if not a selfless and accountable leader. Truly a burden few but perhaps the pillars themselves could understand.
"Has there been any other activity?"
"Oh," Nibs said, and gave Tusk a mournful look.
"No." "I knew it. This place isn't haunted. Why did I contact those ridiculous ghost hunters, Nibs? Why?" "To hunt ghosts?" "I should have just left this place. I should just burn it down here and now. There's no coming back from this sort of public humiliation."
Tusk flung himself onto a bench he'd had commissioned from a savant carpenter out of Dunlow. The moron couldn't even wipe his own ass, but he could make mahogany sing like a church hymn.
"I'm finished, Nibs. Finished, I tell you."
Nibs seemed to be about to try and comfort him when there came a sound from outside the hotel. It was the sound of a wagon coming to a halt. His skin went cold and goose-pimpled, and his ears rang loud as the toll of church bells. He peeked out the window to see a wagon sitting in front of the hotel, pulled by a pair of indifferent horses. It looked held together by spite and twine, but the people riding it were another matter entirely. The first he noticed was a woman with the stride of a judge and the face of someone preparing to give a speech about everything wrong with the wallpaper. Her coat snapped in the wind as she stepped onto the gravel, and her eyes scanned the inn like a map she already knew. The second woman was all scarves, bangles, and chaos. She looked like she'd been born on a stage and never left it. She hit the ground with a skip, arms outstretched like she was greeting old ghosts. Her soft, plump frame swayed with the easy confidence of someone who'd never once apologized for taking up space.
"Ooh,"
she said, voice breathy with excitement.
"She's dripping with cursed energy. I feel like I'm being watched already."
"That's probably the rats," the first replied without looking up from her notebook. Tusk bit his lower lip so hard he worried he'd drawn blood. There were no rats here. He'd made sure of that. The accusation alone filled his heart with a fire, the kind that only burns in men who have spent their lives polishing brass doorknobs that no one noticed. Still in the wagon, a man hunched beside a contraption so large and so brass-heavy that it looked like it might explode from one wrong move. Tusk stared. The man was elbow deep in the machine, tightening bolts and adjusting dials, muttering sweet nothings to it like it was a sleeping infant.
"Remember, sir,"
Nibs muttered from behind him,
"first impressions are everything. Smile like you own the place." "I do own the place, Nibs." "All the more reason to look it,"
Nibs said brightly. The boy seized the handles and threw the double doors open with what might have been a grand flourish, had he not caught on the rug and stumbled to a stop halfway. Tusk waited a moment for the boy to compose himself and stand up straight. Then, after Nibs had stood at attention and gave a bashful smile, Tusk held his head high and ticked his way out the door and down the stone front steps. He wrung his hands, then forced a smile that died halfway to his eyes.
"Good evening,"
he managed, throat catching on nerves.
"You must be the woman from the pamphlets, and the man with the, machine."
"That's us," the first woman said, snapping her notebook shut. "I'm Carissa Bellamy, investigative analyst. This colorful creature is Sally Spindle, spirit liaison and emotional support.
And finally, we have Eugene Ball, machinist and operator of all devices, spectral or otherwise. With a practiced flick of the wrist, she added, Bellamy and Spindle's Society for the Pursuit of Post-Mortem Phenomena at your service. Very impressive. Bit of a mouthful, though, isn't it? I told you so, Sally said as she looked over the grounds. Carissa rolled her eyes. You must be Mr. Tusk. It's so great to meet you. I've read every article about your hotel in the papers. Unfortunately, yes, I am. And this... He swept his hand over the grounds like a ringmaster unveiling his prized act. Is the Violet Vale Hotel. He held the pose, waiting, not for roaring applause perhaps, but certainly something grander than the polite silence he received. Looks fancy, said Eugene as he leaned against the back of the wagon. Oh, Miss Sally said. She looked pale. This place. A gust of well-timed wind carried some stray leaves across the courtyard. Miss Sally pressed her fingers to her head, eyes shut tight. She wobbled a bit, as if she might faint. Sorry about that. It's past, Miss Sally said as she opened her eyes again. Oh, this was just too much. Tusk's nerves were a live wire, sparking with equal parts dread and the strange, heady thrill of adventure. It was all unexpectedly exhilarating. Pardon me, but are you all for real? My contacting you was out of desperation, you see. I won't lie. Normally, I wouldn't lend so much credence to such... Horseshit? Sally offered. Malarkey, Eugene followed. Hogwash, Carissa finished and crossed her arms. Tusk blinked. His mouth opened. Well, I mean, I didn't mean to suggest. Carissa smiled thinly. It's all right. We've heard it all before, Mr. Tusk. We know this sort of work isn't exactly embraced by polite society. Tusk gave a sheepish nod. I meant no offense. None taken, said Eugene. We're used to it. Still don't stop the dead from knocking, though. A metallic crank shrieked from the wagon. Eugene bent over it with the squat determination of a boneyard tinkerer, goggles fogged, knuckles black with grease, muttering at the gears like they were stubborn livestock. Why, we're only the foremost line of defense against the other side's most stubborn, repugnant, and smelly of demons, ghosts, and goblins. That and we're miles ahead of any competition what comes knocking. So, yes-sirree, I'd say we're the genuine article there, Tusky boy. Mr. Tusk felt it would have been acceptable to educate the young man in the ways of nicknaming. He didn't much appreciate Tusky boy, but they were his guests, and they were here to help after all. That machine of yours, what exactly is it? Eugene glanced at him, like he'd just asked what a hammer was. This here? Oh, nothing much, just a tri-lensed chrono-optic impression engine, Eugene said, adjusting a knob with deliberate flair. Fitted with a pressurized phosphor drum, variofocal bellows, and a dual-mode heliotype condenser. Tusk blinked at him, then blinked again. Eugene, be nice, Sally said. It's a camera, Mr. Tusk. I've never seen a camera like this. You plumb sure ain't. I fitted this thing with the crank of a Gatling gun so it captures images, rapid fire, Eugene said and struck the pose of a quick-draw outlaw with finger guns. Carissa gently took Tusk by the arm. Your wire said there was a particular room that needed our attention. Would you be so kind as to show it to us? Tusk politely pulled his arm away from her and adjusted his tie. He looked them over with a clinical eye. Among the three, he'd have guessed that only the women had bathed in the last month. The man's hair was oily and unkempt, and his hands were painted black with grease. His boots were no better, mud-caked and filthy. Tusk's hotel was available to all who could pay, true, but even then he was used to his guests bringing with them some small amount of decorum. Leave your shoes at the door, please. Carissa nodded to Eugene, who raised his eyebrows and chuckled. Tusk inclined his head and led the way, the three investigators falling in behind him. Nibs held the door precisely as Tusk had taught him, the perfect mix of prompt and invisible. That was their mantra at the Violet Vale, after all. Enjoy your stay. You won't even know we're here. I haven't been up here since the incident,
Tusk said as the group reached the top of the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the deep crimson Exminster carpet, a custom weave of wool and silk imported at great cost, patterned with curling gold filigree that mirrored the ironwork of the chandeliers below.
That was months ago now. Since then, the papers have been fraught with tales of this place. They say it's haunted. They say it's cursed. But I've seen nothing of the sort.
They reached the door with the golden numbers 209 on its face. Tusk pulled a large keychain from his coat and inserted the skeleton key into the lock.
This is where it happened.
He pushed the door open. The room was pristine. The bedspread lay smooth and untouched. The curtains hung straight, and not a speck of dust dared settle on the polished mirror. The air was still and faintly perfumed, as though it had just been prepared for a guest only moments ago. A large oil painting hung over the writing desk, a somber gentleman in a plum waistcoat, his painted eyes following the room in quiet judgment. Sally stepped in, turning in a slow circle.
It's unnervingly tidy.
Tusk lit up.
Why, thank you. Not a compliment, she muttered. It's like a stage set for a play, Carissa said as she looked over the room. Like if I touched anything, it'd collapse. Nonsense. The Violet Veil is built to last, not like those crumbling roads you hear about in Cherry Hill.
I heard a wild story about that, actually, Eugene said. Heard some fella climb down one of those sinkholes with like an army of rats at his back or something.
I heard it was cockroaches, Sally said.
Tusk had heard the same story, though he had heard it was a flock of pigeons. Then something shifted in the air. A presence, almost. It felt similar to the wisp he felt out front of the hotel. Sally's hand trembled as she touched the wall.
Something's wrong. I can feel the...
She froze. Her back arched, her head pulled back, and her eyes rolled over, white and blank.
His blood was warm,
she rasped, voice rattling with something dry and borrowed.
He woke when I stabbed him, kicked and squirmed, squealed like a beaten dog.
Carissa and Eugene flinched, hands lifting. Sally's body sagged, then straightened again, that cruel smile splitting through her red locks.
I gave him what he earned, and still it wasn't enough.
Her eyes found Tusk.
You were there. I remember you. The owner.
She stepped closer, dragging in a sniff like a hound.
You still reek of pomade and fear.
Tusk swallowed hard and took a step back. She flashed a wicked smile, and then she lurched for him. Tusk flinched. In an instant, he'd forgotten how to use his hands. They only opened and closed, fluttering endlessly.
"Oh, mother mine!"
he yelped, backing up into the wall. Carissa moved swiftly, yanking a small vial from her coat. She splashed the contents, maiden water or something close, onto Sally's face. The possessed woman shrieked, then collapsed to her knees, coughing. The room settled, and the shadows eased. Whatever had grabbed hold of Miss Sally had let her go. Sally blinked up at him, eyes clearing.
Did I say something awful again? No more than usual,
Carissa said, and Eugene tried to help her up, but she almost tipped over.
I think I'll just stay here for a minute.
Eugene whispered something soft to Carissa that Tusk couldn't make out, and stayed on the floor with Sally. Tusk's nerves went from fried to fricasseed. This was proof, cold, hard, inescapable proof, that his lovely hotel was, to his surprise, infested with supernatural vermin. His eyes drifted over each member of their company: Sally, the medium, Eugene, the machinist, and Carissa, the fearless leader. There was a thought in his mind that appeared in an instant. At first, it was vague and had no discernible shape. But as he looked over the group of ghost hunters now, it all felt like a sort of grand crescendo, like the end of a play. A damn fine performance, yes, but still a performance. Carissa, the leader, was well rehearsed in her assurances. Eugene spouting jargon with his toy machine that probably did nothing, and Sally, the bow on top, a trembling voice dressed up as a message from beyond. He'd been to enough theaters to recognize actors in costumes, frauds, charlatans, one and all. His chest swelled with certainty. There was as many ghosts in the Vale as there were rats. None. "Excuse me, sir," said Carissa as she made her way across the room, her eyes glued to the inside of the notebook she carried. "This is much bigger than we thought. We'll be needing the keys to the hotel." Tusk was filled with white-hot rage. He wanted them off the grounds immediately. How could he have been so foolish? As his lips parted to hurl insults and shoo them away like vermin, he caught himself. His rage cooled, reshaped into something finer. He smoothed his waistcoat and offered Carissa a ring of keys with a small, knowing smile. "Skeleton keys, every room, every stairwell. You have the run of the place." "Every key, except the ones that mattered." "Thank you, Mr. Tusk," she said, all polite professionalism, and a look in her eye that made Tusk wonder how many other poor sods had fallen for this act. "We'll be needing the space as well, I'm afraid, sir, if you wouldn't mind." Tusk had fallen into a deep trance while watching their ruse, and had barely heard her. "Ah, of course. How long do you anticipate this taking?" "Best guess? You're probably looking at a level 3 Hantu, maybe even a mimic. We won't know until we conduct our research, but I bet we'll be here for maybe 3 weeks." "Of course. Take all the time you need," he said, and meant it. This was going to be entertaining. He bid them good luck with the hunt, shook each of their hands, even going so far as to kneel down and take Sally's hand with both of his and wish her well. He thanked them profusely. He said things like, "It's a wonderful thing you're doing," and "You really are modern-day saints." He backed up to the door and stepped out into the hallway, walking slowly, letting his smile curl into something more private. At the end of the corridor, he paused, glanced back to be sure no one was following. Then he peered through the banisters at Nibs, who still stood at the door, slack-jawed and gazing at, well, probably nothing. He summoned the most commanding psst he'd ever uttered in confidence. And to his surprise, Nibs heard it at once. "Sir?" "Shh," Tusk said with a finger to his lips and urged him to come up the stairs and join him. The boy left his post at the front door, glancing both ways as if crossing the street, then crept up the stairs, heels lifted, arms stiff at his sides. He tiptoed, of all things, tiptoed in his bright little uniform, a rat in livery, ridiculous from head to toe. "Yes, sir? Quiet now, my boy. I need you to come with me." Then, with a practiced hand, he nudged a section of paneling. The wood swung inward, revealing a narrow gap between the walls, steeped in dust and shadow. Tusk slipped inside, and Nibs followed, closing it behind him. Directly ahead was the back of the same oil portrait that hung over the writing desk in room 209. The backs of its painted eyes now nothing more than 2 pinprick openings. Through them, he had a perfect view of the 3 moving about and checking corners and muttering their little schemes. "Do you think he bought it?" he heard Sally ask. Carissa clinked the ring of keys in her hand. "He gave us the run of the place, so yeah, I think he paid every penny." "They say a sucker's born every minute," Eugene said and helped Sally up. Crooks. Clever crooks, maybe, but still, just prey wandering his maze. He folded his hands behind his back, already wondering which of his toys to test on them first. Nibs's jaw near grazed the floor of the passage. "They're phonies?" Tusk rolled his eyes. "A very astute observation, Nibsy boy." "What are we gonna do, sir?" Tusk had expected the investigators to sniff out the lies, to dispel the rumors that haunted his halls and tarnished his reputation, to breathe new life into his beloved Violet Vale. He hadn't expected this. His thoughts strayed back to the last family in room 209, the ones who ruined everything. The husband had a habit of talking in his sleep. That was the cause. a slip of the tongue confessing one of his numerous affairs to a wife already half mad. Tusk had watched her pace for hours through the painted eyes above the desk. His hand rested on the gas valve. One twist, and the whole room would fall silent. He could have taken the husband and wife to the lower levels, the ones no guest knew about. Nibs would spirit the children off to Grinlock Gate, vanishing them into new homes. Neat, orderly, painless. He wasn't a monster. Not entirely. But when the wife took up the scissors from the desk, he stayed his hand, too curious to look away. He'd never seen another carry out what he considered to be his own pastime. The blood was messy, and the aftermath was worse. Had he known how deeply it would sour the lifeblood of the Vale, he'd have turned that valve without hesitation. The family would have disappeared cleanly, the hotel untainted. Instead, he had watched, and the Vale had never been the same. Tusk dragged his fingers through his thinning hair. The stubborn tuft stood tall as ever, mocking him. Saints, how long had he been looking like this in front of guests? He spat in his palm and plastered it flat with violent strokes, and turned to Nibs.
"Did I get it?"
The boy's eager thumbs up made Tusk smile wide again. Finally, it was all falling into place.
"How long do you think we can stay for?"
Eugene asked.
3 weeks, give or take,"
Carissa replied. Tusk placed his hand on the valve. How unfortunate. Their stay seemed to have been cut short. There's more to this story, friends. More than I've told you tonight. I'll share the rest with you another time. But for now, and just so you don't lose sleep over it, I'll say this much. The Violet Vale still stands. Not the palace it once was, oh no. These days, it sits in squalor, home to vagrants and drifters, a hollow echo of Tusk's grand dream. But how it came to that shape, well, that's a tale we'll have to uncover down the road. Until then, travelers, keep your fire lit, 'cause we ain't alone out here. You've been listening to From Shallow Graves, owned and produced by Smug Rust Studios, written and performed by Red Edwards. You can find these stories carried on the air through YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to dig deeper, join our Patreon for early access, extended cuts, and behind-the-scenes fragments. Share your own whispers by joining our Reddit community at r/FromShallowGraves, or by sending smoke signals to Smug Rust Studios on Twitter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and spread the word at your own campfire. Nothing carries further than word of mouth. Thank y'all for listening. Y'all have a good night.